Welcome to a presentation about financial reconciliation. As you know, financial reconciliation is a requirement of your grant. This presentation will help you understand what reconciliation is and what you need to do to prepare. This presentation will include an overview, what to expect, what to prepare, financial documentation by expense category, and other required documentation. The first thing we want you to understand is that financial reconciliation is not an audit, but a review of your finances for this grant, for one invoice period. The financial reconciliation process examines a grantee's paid invoice through a comprehensive review of a grantee's expenses and supporting documentation for that invoice period. MDH is responsible for providing oversight for grantees, fiscal competency, and compliance. You are responsible for maintaining relevant books, records, documents, and accounting procedures and practices for at least 6 years after the grant ends. So what to expect? A financial reconciliation can happen at any time and for any invoice period throughout the grant period. When it's time for a financial reconciliation, you will be contacted via email with additional details and instructions. You will have 30 days from the date of that email to submit your supporting documentation for the invoice period identified. So what to prepare? It's important to keep thorough documentation for every grant expense throughout the life of the grant. Supporting documents to retain include, but are not limited to, purchase orders, invoices, receipts, canceled checks, general ledger reports, bank statements, check stubs, timesheets, gift card logs, and payroll records. There are two types of supporting documentation: source documentation and proof of payment. First, we're going to talk about source documentation. Source documentation confirms and provides additional detail about the expense. Examples of source documentation include vendor invoices, receipts, travel logs, mileage records, expense reports, timesheets, FTE breakdowns, payroll reports, proof of a federally approved indirect cost rate if you have one, and cost allocation plans. Some documentation should provide enough detail for MDH staff to verify the product or service, vendor, dates, unit cost, and the totals. If costs are prorated between more than one program or grant, the grantee will need to provide proof of this as well. Now we're going to talk about the second type of supporting document, which is proof of payment. Proof of payment demonstrates that the expense was paid by the grantee. Examples of proof of payment documentation include copies of canceled checks, both sides of the check, or reports from financial systems like a bank statement with the logo on top, or a voucher, account activity reports, and income and expense reports. General ledger reports can be sufficient proof of payment documentation. A general ledger report can be generated by a financial accounting system. It shows your income and expense total by account category for a set time period. An example of an account category is salary or supplies. General ledger reports include less detail than other types of financial reports, including account activity reports and income and expense reports. For purposes of MDH's financial reconciliation requirement, a general ledger report is sufficient when it's specific to the income and expense of the grant. If you are unable to isolate grant-specific income and expense on a general ledger report, a more detailed report should be reviewed. It is also a best practice to request a more detailed report if more information than that on the general ledger is needed or there are more questions. MDH accepts financial reports in all formats, such as PDF or Excel. Sufficient proof of payment for expenses paid by credit card should not only include the invoice or receipt, but also proof that the credit card balance was paid. If the expense was paid with a business credit card that belongs to the grantee organization, this additional documentation should show that the grantee paid. The credit card company, that the grantee paid the credit card company in at least the amount of the expense total. If the expense was paid with a personal credit card that belongs to an employee of the grantee organization, this additional documentation should show that the grantee paid the employee a reimbursement amount at least equal to the expense total. Please remember that many of the reports or copies that you send us have private information. Before sending your documentation, please be sure to redact or cross out any private data, such as home addresses, social security numbers, MICR numbers, bank account numbers, credit card numbers, names of clients or grant participants. Only the Financial Reconciliation Certification Form completed by MDH with any findings from the reconciliation becomes public data. Everything submitted by the grantee will be safeguarded as either non-public or private. Now we're going to talk about expense category financial documentation. The first expense category is salary and fringe. The source documentation that should be provided would include a payroll report, timesheets approved by the supervisor for hourly wages. This is required if the payroll report does not show sufficient details to show the time spent on the grant. The timesheets should be signed by both the supervisor and the employee. An FTE breakdown, which is the percent of time allocated to the grant. Any time charged to the grant must be based on actual hours and must account for 100% of the employee's time. Proof of payment. Payroll report from an accounting system sufficient to show that at least the contracted salary, wages, and/or benefits have been paid from grant funds with individual staff identifiable and fringe benefits broken down by type. Here are some considerations. Can the documentation identify individuals for whom grant funds were used to reimburse salary and/or fringe? Is the expense billed correctly on the MDH invoice? Like there are no math errors. Is the expense allowable and reasonable for the grant program and included in the approved budget? For salary expenses, are partial FTEs billed correctly? For hourly wages, was a timesheet with 2 signatures approved by the supervisor submitted? Are all categories of fringe benefits standard and reasonable? If you don't have 2 staff people, you can use a board member. The next category is contractual services. The source documentation needed for contractual services would be a detailed invoice or receipt from the contractor or vendor. This must include the vendor name, the date, the per item cost, and invoice total with any discounts or additional charges, like tax, shipping, and handling. Proof of payment for this would be a copy of the front and back of a canceled check, or bank statements with the logo, or a financial report from an accounting system with at least the level of detail included in a voucher sufficient to show that the expense has been paid. Some considerations for contractual services are: is the expense billed correctly on the MDH invoice? No math errors. Is the expense allowable and reasonable for the grant program and included in the approved budget? Was additional pre-approval from MDH needed for the expense? If so, is there record that it was obtained? Is the invoiced contractor or vendor time within the grant's performance period? Is the contractor on the federal or state list of debarred and suspended vendors? Now for the travel category. Source documentation for travel should be a detailed invoice or receipt from the vendor, like a hotel receipt, car, or rental company or airline receipt. This must include the vendor name, the date, the per item cost, and invoice total with any discounts or additional charges like tax, shipping, and handling noted. Employee expense reports, if required by the grantee's own organizational policy. If expense reports tracks mileage, this could replace a mileage log. For mileage records or travel logs, which you'll see on the next slide, are something to submit. Proof of payment for the travel category is a copy of the front and back of canceled checks, bank statements with the logo, or a financial report from an accounting system with at least the level of detail included in a voucher sufficient to show that the expense has been paid. Keep in mind that some grantees may have a lower rate than the federal IRS mileage rate. Grantees should follow their own policies and procedures. Considerations for travel are: is this expense billed correctly on the MDH invoice with no math errors? Is the expense allowable and reasonable for the grant program and included in the approved budget? Was pre-approval from MDH obtained for any travel outside of Minnesota? If so, is there record that it was obtained? Was the travel expense made within the grant period? Are expenses within the Commissioner's plan limits? If you have questions about the Commissioner's plan, you should talk to your grant manager. Is mileage included at or under the IRS limit that was current at the time of travel? Here is a sample travel log. Tracking mileage is required for mileage expense, but grantees may choose to use their own tracking log and/or expense report. Supplies or other category. The source documentation needed for supplies or other category would be a detailed invoice or receipt from the vendor, which should include the vendor name, date, per item cost, and invoice total with any discounts or additional charges like tax, shipping, and handling noted. A packing list that does not include per item cost and invoice total is not sufficient. Gift card log for incentives, if applicable. Tax-exempt documentation, if applicable. Proof of payment for supplies or other would be a copy of the front and back of a canceled check, bank statements with a logo, or a financial report from an accounting system with at least the level of detail included in a voucher sufficient to show that the expense has been paid. Considerations for supplies or other category are: is the expense billed correctly on the MDH invoice with no math errors? Is the expense allowable and reasonable for the grant program and included in the approved budget? Was additional pre-approval from MDH needed for this expense? If so, is there record that it was obtained? Was this purchase made within the grant period? Another category is indirect cost. Source documentation for indirect cost is proof of the grantee's federally approved indirect cost rate, if applicable. Not everyone has a federally approved indirect cost rate. A list of items included in the indirect cost total or a cost allocation plan if not already on file. Proof of payment for indirect cost is none. It's important to note not all funding sources allow indirect costs or allow grantees to request their full indirect rate. Considerations for indirect cost is, was this expense billed correctly on the MDH invoice with no math errors? Does the total amount of indirect costs on the invoice exceed the approved indirect cost rate? Are any of the items included in the indirect cost total also included on the invoice as directly billed expenses or double billed? Now we're going to talk about other required documentation. Gift cards as incentives. The grantee organization is required to have written policies and procedures addressing the purchasing, managing, reconciling, distributing, and security of gift cards. The grantee must safeguard these gift cards and ensure they are only used for authorized purposes. Grantees should order and maintain in stock only the number of gift cards that they plan to distribute within 1 month. The grantee's asset tracking policy and procedure must include proper separation of duties. Separation of duties include more than one grantee staff person must be involved in the handling of the gift cards. The person authorizing the purchase of the gift cards cannot have physical access to the gift cards. The people who will have physical access to the gift cards cannot have access to modify records. Unused gift cards must be safeguarded at all times. Keep in mind that board members or contracted partners may be involved if the organization only has one paid staff person. Required tracking of gift cards. Gift cards purchased to be used as incentives must be carefully tracked, reconciled, and are subject to financial reconciliation and audits. Grantees must keep logs of gift card recipients, including the amount of the gift card, the date the gift card was received by the individual, and the service the individual provided to the program. In the next slide, you'll see a sample of a gift card log. In the event of a financial reconciliation, the grantee will be required to provide an invoice or receipt for the gift cards purchased, a copy of the front and back of canceled check or a financial report from an accounting system showing the expense was paid, and the gift card incentive log. This is a sample gift card log. Prior approval of gift cards is important. If the incentives are already included in your most recently approved budget, additional approval is not necessary prior to purchasing the gift cards. If the incentives are not included in your approved budget, prior approval and a budget revision is required. Please email your grant manager a proposed revised budget with gift cards included for approval. Approval or denial requests must be kept with grant records per the grant agreement retention. Also note that not all funding sources allow for the use of incentives or gift cards. Now let's talk about unused gift cards. Grant funding may not be used for any lost, stolen, undistributed, or unaccounted for gift cards. Gift card logs must be reconciled with gift cards purchased or invoiced before the final grant invoice is paid to ensure grant funds do not pay for any lost, stolen, undistributed, or unaccounted for gift cards. In the event that purchased gift cards cannot be fully distributed during the grant period, the grantee must refund MDH for the value of those gift cards. Grantees can refund MDH the value of any undistributed incentives by either short paying a future invoice or sending a check directly to MDH accounts receivable. Grantees should work with their grant manager if a refund is needed to ensure proper documentation is completed and kept. Once refunded, the grantee may use those gift cards in any way the grantee chooses with no ties or responsibilities to MDH, including returning them to the vendor for a refund or future credit if possible. Let's talk a little about incentives versus stipends. MDH differentiates between incentives and stipends as follows. Incentives are items purchased with grant funds used to encourage participation in the specific grant program in order for grantee to adequately fulfill the goals and objectives to the grant program. For example, a gift card for getting a cancer screening or attending an educational session. Stipends are a payment given to an individual who provides work or service for the program itself, which benefits others. For example, a stipend given to advisory board members who spend 2 hours per month or per year helping develop and or guide the program. Another example could be a peer mentor who goes out into the community to teach others about a program. Stipends. If a grantee chooses to use stipends, the grantee will be required to provide a detailed invoice or receipt for the service provided to the program, which should include the vendor name, date, per item cost, and invoice total with any discounts or additional charges, such as tax, shipping, and handling, noted. Copy of the front and back of a canceled check or a financial report from an accounting system with at least the level of detail included in a general ledger report sufficient to show that the expense has been paid. Thank you very much for listening to this session. If you have additional questions, please contact your grant manager.